Estrada.
So what is a high dynamic range spherical panorama? We know it's a mouthful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down into individual components, and hopefully by the end you'll kind of know what the heck I'm talking about. So this is what it looks like unwrapped. This represents a 360-degree by 180-degree view of a scene from just like where you're standing. You can stand in any place, look around, that's what you'd see from that position, all wrapped out into a flat image. There's more than one way to produce them, but the most economical is to just take a regular still camera and point it every single direction and shoot a whole bunch of individual tiles and then combine them in software into a single seamless image. To do that successfully, however, you need to rotate the camera around what's called the nodal point of the lens, which is typically towards the front of the lens. I've marked it with a cross here. Some lenses have a mark on them from the factory. But that's kind of an awkward position. So how do you move the camera around that? Well, you use what's called a VR mount or a panorama mount. And they range in price from a couple bucks, homemade up there in the top left, to, if you have to ask, you can't afford it, down there in the bottom right. It's a cinema gearhead, and they are big bucks. You can also get robotically controlled panorama heads, and the same applies to them. They range in price from homemade, batched up out parts from the parts bin, to factory-built kits that cost tens of thousands of dollars. I knew I wanted one of those myself, because shooting all those tiles can be kind of tedious, but I didn't want to spend tons of money, so what I did is I built my own out of an astronomical it's an alt-azimuth mount. Normally it moves a telescope to track the stars, but what I do is I take over the control of it instead with a small tablet computer. Once you've gathered all the tiles, you need to stitch them, and I use a tool called AutoPanel Pro. It's got really good automated features. It lines up all the tiles automatically, but it also has good manual tools for when the automatic stuff breaks, which it inevitably will. So that's a panorama. What's a high dynamic range image? And why are they so awesome? Well, as you can see from this slide, it clearly illustrates that they go to 11. Much better than 10, right? But in fact, they actually do. Now, that's what's so cool about it. They can go brighter than white, whereas a normal image can maybe only represent black to white. A high dynamic range image can represent astronomical values, like up to, depending on the format, millions, billions. And they're produced by taking a bracketed set of images and then stacking them in software to create a single image that contains the entire dynamic range of that set. This slide kind of illustrates why that's so cool. You can defer exposure until later. You don't have to take it when you take the initial photograph, because you capture the entire dynamic range of the scene in that one image. And that's convenient for all kinds of stuff, especially optical phenomena that would happen kind of before the exposure, like defocus, motion blur, all those things. You can see in this slide, they kind of render a little bit. It's a subtle difference, but it's a big difference because one is much more photographically accurate. And since you can rephotograph the scene, that means, and you have the full scene from one position, you can wrap it on a ball like this, and then essentially rephotograph the scene with different exposure, different point of view, looking a different direction, a different point of view, and create a novel background from that position in space. That's what I've done in this example to create the city outside. As you can imagine, that would be kind of convenient if there's lots of windows and you need to see a view out of every single window. You could just wrap that sphere around the whole scene and have a view out of every single window. It's not always necessary, strictly necessary, to stitch the images either. You can just put them on cards and kind of put them out in front of the camera. And that allows for other cool tricks as well, like putting moving footage on a tile. So that's what I'm doing here for the fountain. The fountain's actually moving footage, and then you can reperform the move on it later. That's what we did on this movie here. All of the animals in the background in that pet shop are actually photographic plates. It's a gigantic moving panorama, and only the characters in the foreground are computer generated. Because you've recorded the literal brightness values in the scene, you can also use it for cool stuff like light. So in this example, it looks like the teapot shooting light rays out, but that's not really what's happening. It's looking out to see how bright the scene is, which is kind of how the algorithm works. So I do it that way. It probably doesn't make sense for you guys. This is what the individual passes might look like. The ideal fill light represents that global, what we would call image-based lighting, the light coming from that bubble. And it creates all that kind of subtle fill, like light from the sky and bouncing off of things. And here's how it looks all put together. Now in the past this would be kind of difficult to light, but using this technique it only took me a couple hours. I did this whole thing in one evening after work, after my day job, where I do the same thing all day. So my name is Estrada. I'm actually doing a course on compositing starting next semester at UNM, and I'm going to be covering a lot of these topics, tile worlds, panoramas, virtual sets, all this cool stuff. So if you're interested, check it out. Thank you.